Welcome to the Chronicles of a Cheating Wife channel. A new story every day. Don't forget to subscribe. April 12th, 9:00 p.m. I never thought I'd be writing a diary entry at my age. 42, for God's sake. But here I am, pen scratching on paper because I can't trust the quiet in my head anymore. The day is heavy. Feels like everything's slowing down around me. Or maybe I'm the one drifting inside some thick, cold syrup of time. I've tried to sleep, but I keep seeing that moment she walked in with him. So I'm here, writing it down, word by word, trying to make sense of the shards in my mind. She walked in with him while I was in the living room, half hidden by the dim blue glow of the TV. Late evening. I'd come home early from work because something, call it intuition, told me I needed to. I was supposed to be on a business trip, but I canceled at the last minute. I told no one, not even her. The apartment was nearly dark, except for that faint bluish flicker bouncing off the walls. I remember the color. Cold, electric, a harsh shine on the edges of the furniture. There was no dog barking. My dog, or maybe our dog. Lately, I've been wondering whom she belonged to more. Anyway, the little terrier was silent, so I guessed she was probably in the bedroom or the kitchen, uninterested in my presence. Then the door opened. She didn't expect me. The hallway light was pale yellow, and it spilled into the living room, bright enough for me to see them both. I recognized his outline first, tall, confident stance. There was no confusion. That was Alex Williams, the same man I'd heard her talk about once or twice in passing. A business acquaintance, she'd said. And behind him, or rather pressed to his side, was my wife, Rebecca. She whispered something to him, a soft laugh, a slow smile, and for a second I just watched the reflection of her expression in the hallway mirror. That smile was the one I used to see years ago, the one I fell in love with. But now it was pointed at him, not me. It was an almost surreal moment, time folding in on itself. I didn't stand up or call out or flick on the lamp. I stayed where I was, chest tight, eyes glued. She wore this knee-length skirt, black with a subtle shimmer, and a blouse that clung to her figure in a way that left no illusions. Her hair was loose, brushing her shoulders. His hand was on the small of her back in a gesture that felt too intimate for just a business acquaintance. When the door clicked shut, they were still caught up in each other. And that's when I made a noise, cleared my throat or something. Immediately, they froze. I saw the color drain from her face. In that moment, I felt my heart hammering so violently that I thought it might burst. She stepped away from him, stammering, "James, you're home." He half turned, not quite scared, but uneasy. A flicker of arrogance or defiance flickered in his eyes, though. He's the type of man who sees the world as his playground. And I was apparently just the guy who paid the mortgage. In the flicker of the TV's bluish light, I rose from the couch. I felt my knees trembling under the tension, but outwardly I tried to stay still, unreadable. In that cramped silence, I could almost taste the betrayal. And it had a metallic tang, like cold iron. "James, let me explain," she started. But her voice wobbled. She seemed uncertain whether to play the victim or the aggressor. I took a step forward, toward both of them. I forced my hands not to clench into fists. I've never been the type to lash out with violence. Even then, with rage boiling inside me, I held it in, because that's what I do. I freeze. I lock down. I turn cold. "Explain what?" I said quietly. My voice sounded like it belonged to a stranger, low and toneless. "That you're with someone else. In my house." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out at first. Then she swallowed and managed to say, "It's not what it looks like." I laughed, a short, bitter bark. "Sure. Then what is it?" He, Alex, tried to step in front of her, as if to protect her, or maybe to shield himself from my gaze. "Let's keep things civilized," he said. "We can talk." "Civilized," I repeated, letting the word roll off my tongue, thick with sarcasm. Civilized. That's a good one. In the dimness, I could see the quick flash of her eyes. Pleading, maybe. Fearful, regretful, or just upset that she got caught. I let the silence stretch, let them drown in it. The dog chose that moment to wander in, nails clicking on the hardwood. She gave one look in my direction, another in Rebecca's, then padded over to Alex and sniffed around his pant leg. My stomach twisted. Even the dog was more curious about him than me. I turned my face away, tried to swallow down the acid rising in my throat. No, I wasn't about to start a brawl. No fists, no yelling. I just felt this heavy coldness inside me. For a split second, I considered walking out the door and never coming back. But that would have been too merciful. I think you need to leave, I said to him finally. Now. He looked at Rebecca, searching for some sign or permission. She didn't speak, just lowered her gaze to the floor. He gave a small nod and moved past me, careful not to brush my shoulder. Then, with one last glance over his back, he stepped out into the hallway, closed the door behind him. The room was too quiet. Only the low hum of the TV filled the space, coloring the walls that restless, flickering blue. My wife, the woman who once smiled at me as though I was the only man in the world, stood by the hallway table, tears shimmering in her eyes. She was about to say something. I held up a hand, stopping her. I don't want your excuses, I said, voice flat. Go to the bedroom. Take off your shoes. Do whatever you want. But don't talk to me tonight. She looked stunned. James, please. We can. Not tonight. I repeated, each syllable slow, firm. I stepped backward, reaching for the lamp on the side table. A quick twist, and warm yellow light filled the living room, chasing away the shadows. But it felt too bright, almost like it exposed too much. My chest felt raw, each breath more difficult. I'll sleep in the living room, I added. I don't want to share a bed with you. Tears rolled down her cheek then, perhaps genuine, perhaps not. But I didn't move to comfort her, didn't offer tissues or a hug. I just let the hush settle in again, let her shuffle to the bedroom with heavy steps, let her quietly close the door. When she was gone, I sank onto the couch and tried to breathe. The dog stayed in the corner, as if uncertain which side to pick. I stared at the blank wall across from me. The TV continued to glow in my peripheral vision, but I couldn't focus on it. I felt like I was choking on broken glass, shards of trust and love, and everything else we'd built over the years. That was the first night. The real nightmare had only just begun. The following morning, I almost pretended it was a bad dream, until I walked into the kitchen. 2 wine glasses on the counter. One bore faint smears of lipstick, the kind my wife had started wearing recently. The other was my glass, though I never got to drink from it. I found it there, half full, as if they'd poured it expecting me to come home later, or maybe not at all, and decided to toast themselves in my space. Rebecca was in the shower. I heard the water running, the distant hiss reminding me of a storm. So while she was in there, I reached for a cloth and methodically wiped her lipstick off that glass. Wiped until there was no trace of red. Then I threw both glasses in the trash, ignoring how they clinked at the bottom of the bin. I stared at the sink, the bright morning light glaring in through the window. Yellow beams, harsh and real, revealing every smudge on the countertop. My reflection in the stainless steel faucet looked twisted, unfamiliar. Pale cheeks, dull eyes, hair disheveled from a night with no sleep. I wanted to break something. I wanted to tear out my own heart and shred it. But I stood still, fists clenched, forcing the anger back down into the pit of my stomach. I needed a plan. Something calm, methodical, like a chess move, because letting rage control me would only prove that I was as weak as she must have thought I was. She emerged from the shower in a bathrobe, hair wrapped in a towel. In the bright morning, she tried to speak to me again. Her eyes were rimmed with red from crying, or so it seemed. James, she began softly. I'm sorry about last night. I I lifted a hand, cutting her off. "I need to go to work," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "We can talk later." She opened her mouth, but I walked out, grabbed my jacket off the chair, and left without another word. Maybe it was cowardly, but I knew if I stayed, I'd end up spitting venom I couldn't take back. At the office, people noticed my silence. My colleagues offered me coffee, tried to make small talk, but I gave them nothing. The hours passed in a slow blue haze. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered every now and then, hurting my eyes. In my mind, I kept replaying those moments, her closeness to him, the sound of her gentle laugh in the hallway, and the way she stepped away from him only after she realized I was there. I tried to bury myself in tasks, spreadsheets, emails, phone calls, but nothing drowned out the memory. My chest was tight, like a steel clamp had locked around my ribs. Around noon, I stepped out for a moment, found myself in the men's room, leaning over the sink, staring into the mirror. The reflection was pitiless. My hair was graying at the temples, signs of age creeping in. I thought about how she was 4 years younger than me, how she'd always said that age didn't matter, that she loved my maturity. And here I was, no longer certain of anything she ever said. I wanted to smash the mirror, but I didn't. Instead, I let out a shaky breath, splashed cold water on my face. My reflection rippled in the water droplets. "No," I whispered, "don't lose it." Somehow, I made it through the rest of the day. I came home late, expecting her to be asleep, but she was in the living room, perched on the edge of the couch like a nervous sparrow. I paused in the doorway, letting the tension coil in the space between us. "James," she said, voice trembling, "we need to." I dropped my coat on a chair. "Talk." "I know." She nodded, eyes wet. Then she offered me a seat, but I didn't sit. Instead, I paced, arms folded. She began to ramble an apology or an explanation, some story about feeling lonely, about me working too much, about how it started as harmless flirting at a corporate event. I listened, stone-faced, but internally I was dissecting her words, matching them to the timeline she gave me, the details she'd let slip in the past. I'd never considered myself a suspicious man, but now logic took over. Every missed call, every sudden girls' night out, each change in her routine. It all lined up too perfectly. She started to cry in earnest, tears running down her cheeks as she insisted she never meant to hurt me, that it just happened, that it was a mistake. I let her speak for a while. Then, when she paused, I quietly said, "Tell me the truth. Did you sleep with him?" Her chin quivered. She tried to look away. I could almost see her debating whether she should lie one more time. Eventually, her shoulders slumped. She nodded. It was like a punch to the gut, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I took a slow breath and said, "How many times?" She covered her face with both hands, sobbing. "I don't know. A few times. It wasn't. I didn't let her finish." "Enough," I said, voice shaking despite my attempts to stay collected. "That's enough." She pleaded with me to understand, to talk it out, to remember the good years, the memories of us building our lives together. Our wedding, our son's first steps. She even said his name, Matthew, in a desperate attempt to remind me we had a family. And that's when I snapped, not with fists or screams, but with a cold, lethal calm. "We do have a family," I said through clenched teeth. "You decided to break it." She sobbed harder, tried to reach out for my hand. I stepped away. My entire body felt numb, like I was just going through the motions. Eventually, she gave up, exhausted, tear-stained, and went to the bedroom. I stood there in the living room for a while, staring at the old photos on the walls. Vacations, family gatherings, birthdays. All the times I thought we were genuinely happy. My eyes burned, but I couldn't cry. A part of me wanted to tear them all off, shred them like confetti. But I resisted, at least for the moment. The next day, I returned home from work earlier than usual. No neighbor greeted me, except old Mr. Stevenson, who was fumbling with his door lock. He glanced at me, eyes squinting. "You're the guy who pays the rent, and she's sleeping with someone else," he muttered, half under his breath. I paused, swallowing a bitter taste. "Yeah," I said quietly, though I didn't owe him that response. Then I walked past him, ignoring the pity in his expression. When I got inside, I found the dog lazing by the window, wagging her tail as if nothing was amiss. My wife wasn't home yet. I headed straight to the bathroom, opened the cabinet where I stored an old shoebox filled with negatives and photos. Our wedding pictures, pictures of Matthew's infancy, vacations, every memory captured on film. With trembling hands, I lifted the box and carried it to the kitchen table. My reflection stared back at me from the polished tabletop. A hollow man, a mere shell. I set the box down, reached for a pair of scissors. Then, piece by piece, I took out the photos. The shot of us on the beach, arms around each other. Slice. The wedding dance, her face lit up with joy. Slice. Me holding our newborn son, her smiling in the background. Slice. No shouting, no outward fury, just cold, steady snipping. Each cut felt like amputation, severing the illusions of our unity, as if dividing the paper could somehow sever the pain. By the time I'd finished, the kitchen floor was covered in little scraps. My breathing was rough, heart pounding, but I didn't cry. I stared at the halves. The left side her face, the right side mine, parted forever. I heard the door open behind me. She walked in, probably expecting to see me dozing in front of the TV or rummaging for snacks. Instead, she found me hunched over the table, a pair of scissors in hand, surrounded by the remains of our family photographs. She gasped, hands flying to her mouth. "James, my God." I didn't say anything, just set the scissors down gently and turned to face her. She stepped forward, tears flooding her eyes again. "Why?" she whispered. I shrugged. My voice felt distant and cold. "They're just pictures, right? If we're already cut in half in real life, might as well match in the photos." She let out a strangled cry, sank to her knees on the linoleum, and began to gather the torn pieces as if she could tape them back together. I stood there, watching her. Part of me wanted to feel pity, but mostly there was nothing left in me but an icy resolve. The following 3 days were tense. She tried to talk, tried to apologize, tried to blame her loneliness, or my long hours, or her own insecurities about aging. I barely responded, kept a facade of calm. I was polite, even in that robotic way. Inside, though, something was building, a quiet plan. I'd always been methodical. Numbers, strategies, business solutions. Now I turned that ability toward a single goal, tearing down everything she had in her life. I started quietly. New locks on the house. In the middle of a Friday when she was at work, I hired a locksmith and had all the exterior locks changed. Set up new passcodes on the home security system. She still had her old keys, but they wouldn't work anymore. I let her keep them. For a time. Saturday morning, I closed our joint bank account and transferred the bulk of the funds into a new account under my name alone. By the time she realized, it was too late. I hired a lawyer, a tough one, recommended by a business colleague who'd gone through a brutal divorce. Gave him all the details, my stable income, her affair, the pictures, the timeline. He said quietly, "We'll make sure you're covered. No child support for her if she's been unfaithful. We can fight for full custody, or set up an arrangement that heavily favors you." I nodded, feeling my chest tighten at the mention of our son. Matthew was away at college, living on campus. I didn't want him to see the ugliness, but soon enough, he'd know. My next move involved Alex Williams. I discovered that his consulting firm had been struggling. Word had it he was looking for an investor or a partnership to infuse new capital. So I pulled a few strings, made a deal with some key stakeholders, and maneuvered behind the scenes to acquire a controlling interest in his company. A man with my background and contacts could do that. It was easier than I'd imagined. Within 3 months, I was effectively the man behind the curtain. Unseen, but holding the strings. And when the time was right, I stepped forward. I demanded changes to the board, restructured the leadership. It was all legal, all above board. Just a series of business decisions in black and white. He realized, too late, who was pulling the levers. I remember the day he saw me stride into the boardroom. I wore a tailored suit, not the usual warm jacket and tie I'd used for everyday business. This one was crisp, charcoal gray, matched my mood exactly. Alex looked stunned, then furious, then nervous. He tried to challenge me, but the other board members were on my side. They knew my pockets ran deep, and their best interests lay with me. When I gave the order, he was terminated. No severance. The official reason: poor performance. I pretended to show regret, but everyone knew it was just a formality. My signature on the documents sealed his fate, and by extension, sealed hers. All the while, the tension in our home was like living in a freezer, except the cold was internal. We barely spoke. She tried to remain civil, possibly hoping I'd show mercy. But every day, I came closer to kicking her out completely. Finally, the moment arrived. She and Alex had been planning some sort of vacation together, probably to regroup after everything. I overheard her on the phone. Maybe with him, maybe with a friend. Something about flights to Florida or the Caribbean. A chance to run away. So I made my move. 2 moving trucks. One was for her things. The other was for mine. She came home that afternoon to find men in uniforms boxing up her clothes, her perfume, her shoes, jewelry, random knickknacks. They took her personal papers, her everything. The dog barked incessantly, trotting around in circles, confused by the upheaval. She stood in the doorway, mouth open, tears forming again. "What's going on?" "James, stop, please." I calmly directed one of the workers to carefully wrap a piece of her expensive porcelain figurine collection. Then I turned to her. "I'm done," I said simply. "This is all your stuff. Take it." She sobbed, tried to argue, but I had the new locks, the new security codes, and the law on my side. She threatened to call the police. "Go ahead," I said, shrugging. "I'm not laying a finger on you. I'm just removing your property from my house." She ended up calling her sister, who arrived in a flurry of panic. But there was nothing she could do. I was calm, methodical, unstoppable. I told them both that my lawyer would be in touch. Then I instructed the second truck to load my personal items, things I wanted to keep or store away. I was leaving, too, because I no longer wanted to live in that house. It was stained with memories I couldn't bear to face. I had found another place, a smaller, more modern condo in a high-rise downtown. Quiet, minimalist, perfect for me alone. When the trucks drove away, she stood on the curb, watching her possessions vanish. She couldn't even speak through the tears. I walked up to her, looked her in the eye. For a moment, the weight of all those years pressed on my chest. The memories of our wedding, our child, the early days when we used to laugh at silly things. But then I saw her face, the face that had once lit up for another man. I felt nothing but a chill. "I'm changing everything," I said softly. "The locks, the accounts, my entire life. You're not in it anymore." She let out a shaky breath. "You can't just erase me." I gave a small, bitter smile. "I can. You did it first, remember." She turned away, tears spilling, her sister putting an arm around her. And I walked off, got into my car, and drove to my new place. The next few months passed in a blur of legal documents, court dates, and strategic moves within Alex's now failing consultancy. I slashed budgets, laid people off, sold off assets. He tried to negotiate, but I refused to meet him in person. I stayed behind my desk, behind the shield of corporate procedures, delegating tasks to lawyers and accountants. Rebecca tried calling me, texting me, begging for some compromise, financial or otherwise. She discovered that all her credit cards were cut off. She had some of her own savings, sure, but it wasn't enough to sustain the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she ended up in debt, struggling to find a place to live that she could afford on her salary. Alex tried to salvage his reputation, maybe even their relationship, but word got around that he was blacklisted in certain investment circles. My influence reached just far enough to ensure nobody gave him a second chance. As for me, I became colder than ever. People at work noticed, though they didn't question me too much. My own lawyer pulled me aside once and said, "James, maybe you should consider therapy or counseling. This is a lot of emotional strain." I just gave him a thin-lipped smile and said, "Don't worry about me. Focus on finishing the job." Inside, I was hollow. I found no joy in anything, not in the new condo with its view of the city skyline, not in the destruction I was causing my wife and her lover. I only felt a grim satisfaction. Revenge was never supposed to feel good. It was just necessary. One late evening, I sat in my new living room with a glass of whiskey. The city lights outside pulsed in a rhythmic glow, painting the room in faint shades of yellow and orange. No dog scratched at the door, no footsteps in the bedroom. I was alone. I sipped the whiskey, letting it burn down my throat. I stared at the blank wall, a place where I hadn't bothered to hang any photos. Because I didn't have photos anymore, I destroyed the old ones, and I had no desire to create new ones. My phone buzzed, a text message from my son. Matthew was checking on me. He knew something was off but didn't have the full story. I typed a brief reply. "I'm fine. Love you. We'll talk soon." Then I set the phone aside. My reflection in the whiskey glass looked strangely distant, like I was someone else, someone who'd lost a piece of his soul. I closed my eyes, remembering the day I walked her down the aisle at our wedding, remembering her trembling smile, her delicate hands holding mine. We were so young, so hopeful. Where did it all go so wrong? But the memory only twisted like a knife in my gut, so I pushed it away. I took another gulp and tried to feel nothing. Eventually, the final steps of my revenge came to pass. Alex was pushed out entirely, left jobless, and with a tarnished reputation. Rebecca, in debt and humiliated, was forced to rely on short-term gigs or small marketing jobs that paid a fraction of what she used to earn. The divorce was finalized, awarding me a majority of the assets. She got little more than a battered car and whatever personal items I hadn't confiscated. I could have demanded that she never contact me again, but ironically, I didn't need to. She didn't want to face me any more than I wanted to face her. We parted ways with a silent acceptance that our story was over. Months later, I found myself in my condo on a Saturday morning. The sunlight was softer now, more gentle, a pale yellow that filtered through the curtains. I'd made some coffee, black and strong. It was early, and the city was still stirring to life. I had a box of documents on the kitchen table, a final stack of divorce-related files, old receipts, bits of paperwork from our shared life. I planned to shred them, to erase the last paper trail connecting us. As I fed the pages into the shredder, piece by piece, I paused at a photograph that had been tucked between two legal forms. It was just a small snapshot. Rebecca, me, and Matthew at a baseball game. We all looked happy, sunburned, with cheap stadium caps perched on our heads. She was smiling at me, her eyes bright, my arm slung around her shoulder. Our son was in the middle, holding a giant foam finger. An ache flared in my chest. I swallowed, feeling my throat constrict. Then, with the same cold determination I'd honed over these brutal months, I fed the photograph into the shredder. The blades hissed, and the memory was gone. When the last shred curled out, I pressed the off switch. The machine hummed, then fell silent, leaving me alone with the distant roar of city traffic. I stood there, shoulders tense, wishing I could say I felt lighter, or freer, or triumphant. But the truth was, All I felt was emptiness. I remembered something my father used to say. Revenge doesn't bring back what you lost. It just leaves you with more emptiness. He was right, of course. But that emptiness was all I had now. Maybe it was enough to not feel raw with pain. I thought of calling Matthew, maybe telling him some version of the story he could understand. But not yet. I decided it could wait until after my second cup of coffee. I stared out the window at the city, bright sunlight streaming in, hitting the walls with a golden glow. But even that color felt cold to me. A new day, a new life, a new me. A man shaped by betrayal and fueled by vengeance. A man who discovered that once you let the cold in, it never fully leaves. That night, I wrote another entry in my diary. The same leather-bound notebook I'd started after everything went down. I used to think love was the ultimate bond, but it's actually trust. Love can weather storms, maybe, but trust. Once it's broken, there's no patching it up. You can pretend, but it's never the same. I wonder if I'll ever trust anyone again. If there's still warmth in me somewhere, or if the cold is permanent. She tried to say sorry, but sorry doesn't fix the nights I spent doubting my worth as a husband, as a man. Sorry doesn't mend those torn photos, or unbetray me. And so we end up here, her in debt, alone with the consequences of her choices. And me alone as well, but with a layer of ice around my heart. I didn't scream when I caught them. I didn't throw punches or beg. I simply acted. Maybe that's the scariest kind of vengeance, the calm one. The one that creeps up and dismantles your life piece by piece. Because in the end, I didn't just want her out of my life. I wanted the memory of us to crumble. I wanted her to feel the hollowness that I felt. Am I proud of what I did? No, but I can't pretend I regret it. Maybe that's my weakness or my strength. I'm not sure anymore. I just know I'm cold. Colder than her lies. Colder than their betrayal. Maybe it's my new shield. I'll move on. Slowly. Maybe find a new purpose. But I know I'll never be the same. There's a line we cross when someone betrays us so deeply. On the other side, we're not the men we were. We're something else. A darker shape, forged by the heartbreak. I used to be a good man, I think. Now, I'm just a man who got even. And if that's all I have left, I'll take it. Because it's better than choking on sorrow forever. When I closed the notebook, my hands were shaking. I forced myself to set it aside, to breathe in and out slowly. The sky outside was a dusky blue, the lights of the city shimmering below. I walked over to the window, resting my forehead against the cool glass. Down in the streets, people bustled about, living their lives, blissfully unaware of the drama that had consumed mine. A swirl of headlights and neon reflected on the glass, painting me in flickers of color. Blue, yellow, dim, flicker. It felt like a metaphor for my existence, a continuous cycle of cold light and fleeting glow. And that was when I realized, with a kind of grim acceptance, that the hardest part of all of this wasn't the betrayal, or the revenge, or the loneliness. The hardest part was that I still felt something. Underneath the armor of ice, pain still pulsed. The heartbreak remained. It would ease eventually, like a wound that stops bleeding, but the scar would be permanent. I would carry it in every breath, in every hesitant step toward any new relationship. Maybe I'd trust again, or maybe I'd always look over my shoulder, waiting for the next betrayal. But for now, I was done. Done with the old life, done with her, done with illusions. I returned to my couch, letting the city lights wash over me. And in the hush of my apartment, I let the coldness seep in a little deeper. Because cold, too, is an emotion, a shield, a boundary. It was all I had left to protect the remnants of who I once was. And in that final quiet, I almost laughed, bitterly, softly, at the realization that sometimes the greatest show of strength is simply not letting them see how badly you're broken inside. That's what I'd become. A man so cold he could freeze the world around him, if only to keep his shattered heart from breaking further. And so I stayed there, alone in my fortress of ice, wishing the burning in my chest would stop, yet knowing it wouldn't, not for a very long time. The city glowed a dull gold on my wall, and the night stretched ahead in silent, merciless darkness.